So what happens if you need to update the material of a certain part on a specific cabinet? If you remember back from the ProPath selection, we created a material schedule called Cherry/Prefinished UV, which is responsible for telling Cabinet Vision what materials go on certain parts. For example, what's a finished end made out of, what's an unfinished back made out of. And so what happens if you need to do something slightly different from your material schedule? Do you go create a new one? Do you just manually change the material? Do you override it at the room level? We have several different options. So the first thing I would think about is, do I potentially want to use this template, I'll call it, or this material schedule again on another job? And if the answer to that is yes, then I would say your best bet would be to close the job, go copy the Cherry/Prefinished UV or whatever you're on, and then make the changes you need and come back into the job and change it to that. Now, you have to be careful with that because you don't really want to have 100 or 200 or 1,000 material schedules in your list after a year. So you have to be a little bit cautious or careful with when you just make a copy or a duplicate of a material schedule. So let's say, for this example, our backs are currently made out of UV. Let's say I want to make these cherry instead. So we ruled out that we don't really need this on another job, so we don't need to go create a whole new material schedule. So what are our options? The first thing we can do is we can go into Room, Cabinet, and Materials. And this is separated between upper and base. So let's update the upper material schedules just for this room. This is not changing our system settings at all. So I would go to Case, Interior, that's currently 1/4 inch UV. I'll just make it 1/4 inch cherry because that's really the only option I have. And then we hit back and it'll say Update Room with Changes, which we yes want to do. So now on my upper cabinets, I have cherry backs. Now my base cabinets don't yet because of the way the material schedules are separated. So I would also have to do this one. Now the second and fourth one we can ignore for now. Those are finished interior versions of the material schedules, which we have not covered yet. So you can just ignore that for right now. We'll cover that in a future video. If I go this route, I would need to change both the base and the upper and modify for this room. Now, I'm not particularly fond of this because there's just not much visibility into what's changed. I think it can have its place, as long as you're very careful. You could so easily move to a different species and you totally lose track of what you had on that one. So it's not super great, but it at least gives you the ability to change it at the room level without creating an entire new material schedule. So it's definitely something to consider. Now I'm going to set this back to Cherry UV. So now it's back to defaults. And the third option we have, if we don't want to duplicate it and we don't want to override it at the room level, is we can manually change it for each cabinet. So from the Face Planner in view, I can click on the unfinished back. I can right click and go to Properties. And I can manually change this from 1/4 inch Prefinished UV to, make my screen a little bigger, 1/4 inch cherry. Okay, so all three of those ideas that I mentioned there will achieve the same thing in sorts. If I went with the individual part level override, I would have to do it on every single cabinet because this cabinet's still UV, but this one is cherry. Now, obviously I could just delete this one and always copy from this if I wanted to do several cabinets. I could save a couple clicks by copying, but you get the idea. So that's the considerations we have to make. Is it going to be used in another job? If it is, just go make another material schedule. If it's not going to be used, if it's going to be applied to this entire room, you can consider making the room override. Just be cautious that you don't lose your changes, and if you happen to change species, just know that you would have to make that modification to whatever you change to again. Third, if you don't like either of those options, you can change it at an individual level. Now, I said 3 options, but I'm going to mention a 4th because UCSs can also play into this. If you find yourself changing materials at a part level or at a room level very often, it could be that you could set up a UCS that automatically changes things. And we'll cover this more when we get into the UCS topic. But just know that if you find yourself always changing, say for example you have a filler and the return end is always defaulting to the finished end material and you don't want it to use that. If you find yourself repeatedly changing the same thing to the same material, there's potential to automate that with the UCS. And like I said, I'll talk about that later, and I'll give you an example of doing that with a user created standard. But the 3 main options again are creating a whole different material schedule, overriding at the room level, or overriding at the part level. As a follow-up to the last video on changing materials, this leads us into what happens if we want to do a finished interior cabinet. Say we have an open cabinet or a cabinet with glass doors. So what I don't want you to do is click into each part and change it to cherry and then change the unfinished in. We don't want to do that. So cabinet has a built-in functionality. We right click and go to properties, there's an exposed interior. And if we go inside the cabinet, go to our section properties and go to case, this same checkbox is here. Now, currently, checking that is not going to do anything, and I'll help you understand why. So what that button is doing, this little exposed interior, it's switching from the standard material schedule to the exposed interior material schedule. And ours are the same, and that's why the button didn't do anything. So we only have one, so I'm actually going to save this job and go back and create a finished interior version. Because just like we have to tell Cabinet Vision which parts get which materials on a standard cabinet, we also have to assign those on a finished interior cabinet, because you might treat things totally different on a finished interior cabinet. So let's save this and go back to the main screen. And let's go to material schedules, and we're going to copy our one material schedule. And I like to use this format. So cherry/cherry is my finished interior. Cherry/prefinished UV is my exterior/interior. And I like using this format because if you only use one interior option, it's not really a big deal. You could say standard and finished interior if you wanted. But I like this because if you ever say you offered walnut interiors, makes it super easy to see that, okay, this is cherry finished interior, this is cherry with UV, this is cherry with walnut. And so if you offer different materials such as melamine or UV or walnut or whatever, this kind of format helps keep track of things. All right, so we have our standard one and then we have our finished interior one. So I'm simply going to go replace anywhere that I see UV with cherry. So on interior banding, this becomes cherry banding. My exposed section is going to be fine because that was already cherry, but interior needs some work. So 3/4 UV will need to be replaced by 3/4 cherry. And that replaces everything that matches. And then the unfinished back becomes 1/4 inch cherry. Frame can stay as cherry, and the toe kick I might actually just leave as UV. That'll be fine. So now let's go back into our job, go to room, and now I'll select this correctly. This is how we should set up a job. We should set up our standard interior and then our exposed interior. And now, when that's set up correctly, now when we check the box and we look at our reports, everything's made out of cherry. In comparison to the standard interior is still using UV. Let me take the doors off so you can see. So you can see that's still using UV plywood, and this, if I add shelves or whatever I do, is going to be cherry. So that's how the finished interior cabinets work. That toggle in the properties menu or inside the cabinet in the case settings simply switches the material schedule, and that button just makes it one click instead of having to go into the cabinet and manually change the material schedule. In this video, I want to talk about the need for custom objects. So you guys have been following along ever since I started from the stock version of Cabinet Vision. I don't have any objects saved here, I'm just working with all the stock options. The point of this video is I want to discuss something that seems weird to a lot of people when they're first starting out. Because even for me right now, it would be hard to draw a complete job. For example, if I had a base cabinet over here and I wanted to put a filler in, I could go to my library and grab this base filler, and it's kind of this weird little stick that doesn't have sides. And my point is it's not really easy, even for me, to put some of these objects in until I spend the time setting them up. Some more examples of this is trying to build even a simple hood cabinet or a floating shelf, or fillers is a big one. And there's some of these things that first, you can't just sit down and draw a job and do it super effectively. And in the section titled Object Intelligence, we're going to talk a whole lot more about building these, making the materials come in right, making it size perfectly, putting miters on things. And you have all this control, but just out of the box, I don't really have options to do things like floating shelves and fillers and other custom objects. So I wanted to just cover that here early on, so that you know that even though it's difficult to do that up front, the beauty of Cabinet Vision is the ability to set up those objects, the ability to do UCSs, and the ability to expand your library. It doesn't mean it's just 10 out of 10 right out of the box. It takes time to develop, it takes skill to develop, And that's the whole point of what we're doing here. We're learning how to better utilize it. We're learning how just exactly what all we can create and how to create those objects. So you can be looking forward to the object intelligence section. In this video, we're going to talk about adding countertops to your job. So I have just a super simple kitchen with all just standard cabinets I pulled out of the library, and you can see there's no countertop. And this video is going to be focused on adding a visual countertop. Those of you who have the countertop module, you can actually like set up constructions and machine like different laminate constructions for countertops. But this video is simply going to focus on putting a nice visual, either granite or quartz or whatever it may be, type of countertop. We don't really, if you don't have the countertop module, you don't even really have to have anything set up because it kind of just, without the countertop module, it just works off of a few settings in the room profile. If you do have the countertop module, you're going to have to set up a construction, a schedule, and get your materials all set correctly. Now, without the countertop module, like I said, we can get by with a much simpler setup. And I actually don't have the countertop module, so I'm not going to be able to show you that. So how do we add countertops? From the plan view, we can go over to the sidebar and find top. And there's two options. There's new top and there's auto build top. And notice how we can select each wall. It's not super obvious, but you can see kind of that it sometimes looks blue and sometimes it looks red, that little outline. So when I click this wall, you see that little outline. When I click this wall, you get the idea. And so that becomes important when we start manually drawing tops, because when I go to auto build tops, I can do one wall at a time, or I can do the entire room. Now, my strategy with countertops are always use the auto build and then make little tweaks as needed, because the auto build normally works really well. And especially on a kitchen like this, it's all square cabinets, all just butting into things. So I expect it to work very well. So I'll do auto build and we can see everything comes in and it puts the miters exactly where they belong. So if I go to 3D, I don't have a texture on my countertop yet, but notice how it assumed I wanted splash. And really, I don't see anything wrong with that. Now let's go look at our room settings. Go into the countertop, and like I said, we can really get by without much of anything, because if I look at this construction method, there's nothing assigned. So those of you with the countertop module, like I said, you'll have to do a little bit more work to actually see your countertops. Those of you whose screen looks like mine without a construction tab, you can just kind of hammer down like this. Okay, so I'm going to put a profile 1/2 inch around. These are just the stock profiles. We can obviously draw new ones to match whoever your countertop supplier is. And then we got a few options here. And now if I change this, like if I want 1.25 inch on the ends and I want a 4-inch splash height and 1.25 inch thickness, and set that as my system defaults, that won't update my drawing. So make your changes before you do the auto build, which in this case, I'm just going to run the auto build again. And now I should have my 4-inch splash and the right thickness. And you can actually see it puts my little 1/2 inch round guy on there. So what if the auto build didn't work correctly? Or what if we don't want splash? Or why does the profile not go around the corner? You see there's just a couple things that we need to clean up. Let's first make the profile come around the edge. So I'll go to top, and instead of clicking auto build this time, I highlight the top that I want to edit and I right click and do edit shape. And I can click on each line and it gives me an option of what type of line this is. So the front is a profile, which we saw. The side is just finished. So I'll simply make that a profile and hit return to save it. And now you can see the profile comes around the corner and that looks super nice. Now, what if we don't want splash? Well, the first thing I would say is if you don't want splash, just get rid of it here. Just, set it to 0. And like I said, you have to do the auto build in order to see that. So now there's no splash. Even though the lines themselves might be set to splash, that's a quick way to disable everything. Now, what if you want splash in some places, but not in other places? Let me put this back to 4, go back to tops, auto build again. Now my splash is back, but let me get rid of the backsplash over here. So it's going to be the same way I just did that profile, which you see I lost my profile change because I auto built again. So that's why I say make sure you make your changes before, if at all possible. So the exact same way I changed this to a profile, I'm going to click on the back, and instead of making that a splash, I'll just do unfinished. Beautiful. Okay, now let's go through another scenario. Let me put it back on auto build. What happens if it messed up the corner? What if the miter didn't come out right, or we needed to do something a little special, or we want to just put an overhang on this end, or whatever the case may be? There's two options. The first is if it's just a little bit off, you don't necessarily have to delete it. You can just edit the shape. So first, let me give you an example of editing the shape of this guy and just extending it 12 inches out the end. So I'm not going to delete it because there's really no reason I redraw all this. I just want to right click and edit the shape. And there's two ways to accomplish this. A lot of people will jump to using the offset tool. So if I click this, click on my blue line and drag in the direction I want to go and type in 12, like that's a good start, but now notice I would have to reconnect my lines and trim that out. And I'm going to go ahead and finish this just to show you this, and then I'll show you the smarter way. So I could get my select tool, I could delete this blue line, and then I need to extend these lines down to here. Anytime you're working with shaping, make sure you have your snap to points down here in the bottom right turned on. And I can drag this line down, connect that. And there's also a really nice tool called Connect, which we're going to cover the CAD tools and shaping in much more detail, specifically with cabinets, but the same shaping tool applies here. Rather than manually click and connect, this time I'll use the Connect tool. I highlight the first line and highlight the second line. And then I would just simply tell this line to be a profile. Now, as you can see, that's not too bad, but rather than offset and then reconnect the lines, let me show you the other option. So let me do auto build tops, and we click into our countertop we want to edit again and go to edit shape. And this time, rather than offsetting, I'm going to click on the blue line and this little dash pops up. It's like a third of the way of the line. So like if I click the red line, you'll see the dash over there, and then there's the dash on the purple line. So it's on every line whenever you're doing CAD and shaping. And what this does is you can actually extend things and it keeps the lines connected. So I'm going to grab that little line, pull it down in the direction I want to go, and type in 12. And notice I didn't have to reconnect any lines. So anytime you're offsetting and you want the whole shape to move with it, use the little line instead of the offset tool. There'll be times for the offset tool, but this is a better use case for now. Okay, that's perfect. Now, back to auto build. What happens if it really wasn't close and I just want to start from scratch? Let's just get rid of everything. So delete all the countertops. Now I have nothing here. Let's just draw this in from scratch. And like I said, the auto build most times at least does 90 or 95% correctly. So very seldom would you draw the entire thing from scratch. Before you start with new top, make sure you highlight the right wall. So in this case, I'll just do new top, and it's highlighted to polygon right now, which I'm going to leave it there for now. And I'm just going to kind of click on each of the corners and then right click to get off of it. Now, I could go and assign every one of these lines, but I'm going to just hit back and see how it does automatically, because a lot of times it does a decent job. Once you can see it knew to put splash there and put a profile up front. Now, this does not include any overhangs. So just like we did earlier, I should click these lines and, make an inch off the end and make an inch and a quarter out the front, or whatever you need with your profile. And that would be good. And now let's select the long wall and do new top. And again, we got our polygon selected. And we go all the way to the other end, click right in the corner, and come down to here. Now technically I could snap here, but I'm going to just snap to the cabinet and then run my offset again. So I'll get my select tool, click on that front line, use the little offset dash and drag down and type in inch and a quarter. Perfect. And we got two more pieces, so I'm going to select my last wall here, grab my countertop tool, and just quickly snap the points to here, and then right click to get off of the shape. Get my select tool and pull this out an inch and a quarter. And finally, with this wall still selected, I'll do this last one. And grab my select tool and stick it out an inch and a quarter. Okay, so you can see it's not terribly hard to manipulate and redraw countertops if they don't come in correctly. Because depending on what type of corner cabinet you have, or if you put a weird filler or something in the corner, sometimes you'll see it not do a miter, and so you'll have to just redo that aspect of it. But like you can see, it's not too hard. It's a pretty nice visual snapping tool. We're going to talk about rendering in a future video, but I do want to at least give you enough so that you can make a decent looking drawing. You can see I have cherry texture on my cabinets, but my countertops are blank. So from within the 3D tab, let's go to textures, go down to countertops, and there's a few countertops in this library. So let's just pick a random one here, and notice it changed my countertop surface, but not my splash. So let's also go to the splash section right below that. and change it. Not totally sure why there's different options. I don't know why you'd ever want something different there, but that's okay. So there you can see we can quickly get countertops and just a nice visual. And so there you can see we can just quickly get a nice visual for our outsourced countertops, and really, especially when we get into the rendering section, we can really make nice drawings. So that's all for this video on adding countertops. In this video, we're going to talk about adding molding to a job. Now, I'm going to keep this video as simple as possible and talk about the way that most people end up using molding. However, I do want to make mention that there's two main concepts when it comes to molding. You can use a profile-based molding, or you can use a material-based molding. In my opinion, the material-based molding is way too much maintenance, way too many materials to manage, and way too many material schedules. In a future video, I'm going to compare these two methods, but for this video, I'm going to show you the easy way just to get a nice visual and get a linear foot measurement. Let's get started. So just like the countertops, over on the left sidebar from the plan view, we're going to have a molding tab. And I like to have the simple shapes in my layers. And again, if you don't see that, if you're seeing the complex lines, just go into layers, edit, advanced, and then check that assembly outlines only. Makes it a lot easier to snap to those lines. Okay, so just like countertops, I'm going to use the auto build, and it's going to add for me. But when I go to 3D, it's not getting my cherry texture. So where does this come from? How do we change the profile? How do we make the molding have the right material? Let's look into those questions. If I go to the room settings and go to cabinet and go to molding, back when we did the clean slate video at the very beginning of this course, we deleted all the system schedules. And so we don't have a molding schedule, and it's not assigned, and that's why there's no texture. So that's why there's no texture, and it doesn't have and so we can see there's no material assigned. So the texture obviously won't know what to do because it doesn't know that it's made out of cherry. So also in this tab, we're able to choose between the different types of profiles. So we can choose, and these are just all the stock Cabinet Vision profiles. In a later video, I'm going to show you how to add your own moldings. If you want to add the moldings from your supplier, there are a few packages available as well that you can import. Okay, so there we can see for each type of molding, you can choose the different profile, and then ultimately we want to be able to choose between cherry and walnut and all our different species. So to do that, I'm going to go back to the main screen, and I'm going to go to material. And technically, you could just go assign 3/4 solid cherry to our material schedule. But I would rather have some separation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight material and add a new folder. And I'm going to call this molding. And then I'm going to go to board stock and copy my 3/4 cherry. And then I'm going to click it and drag it down into my molding folder. And then I'm just going to call this cherry molding. Now, like I said, technically you could have just used board stock, but if you get into Bid Center and costing on a job, it's much nicer to have this separate. That way you're not trying to make all these different prices work together like with profile. That way you're not trying to make all these prices like align perfectly. You just have a clean slate that you can utilize. Now the important thing is because I copied, I got the finished material and I have the cherry texture. So now it's time to assign that to my molding material schedule. And if you remember the ProPath videos that we watched early on, this should be very familiar to you. So right now I have a material schedule called new molding with no materials assigned. I'm going to rename this to cherry, and I'm going to go find my molding category, and I'll assign this to all of the different molding types. Okay, let's go back into our job. And because I just updated that schedule, it still will say material not assigned. So what I want to do is I want to go to utilities and update job. And you've seen this in a couple past videos. This current job that we're in to just refresh itself from the system details. Now if I go back into my room settings, now I have cherry in the list, and if I click on crown or whatever I click on, you can see it's using cherry molding, which is perfect. And then let's just choose a nice profile here, that'll work. And now let's go into our molding tab, and I'll just redo the auto build. Okay, now let's go to the 3D tab, and you're going to see we have a nice cherry texture on there. It knows exactly what to be. Now I will note, if you're in 3D tab, you may not see your molding, and if you don't see molding from the 3D tab, click on the layers, edit, and make sure the little light bulb is on and the pencil is on. Light bulb means you can visually see it on the screen. Pencil means when you go to drawings, it will be there as well. Okay. So once you have the molding on the job, I'm going to go to Report Center really quick. We have not been here yet, and we'll cover this in a future video, but there's a report called Molding Report. In the Report Center, there is a report called Molding Report. And here's where you can see the profile, the material, and here's this linear foot measurement that we're talking about. Now, in my opinion, this is by far the easiest way to manage your moldings. Even if you're outsourcing or building, like I know it doesn't tell you exactly how many 8-foot sticks or how many 10-foot sticks you need, but I would rather do the math and keep this simple rather than trying to set up a cherry for the Crown 405, a cherry for the Crown 406. And again, I don't want to go into too much detail because I want to have a full side-by-side comparison on those two strategies of doing molding. This is by far the most common that I see. Just keep the material simple, add your profiles, and then utilize the linear foot measurement. Okay, now just like countertop, the auto build sometimes does a good job. I find molding more often than not does need a little bit of tweaking. So you can see it's actually running past, which doesn't really hurt visually, but I'm gonna go ahead and fix this. So just like the countertops, I can highlight what I'm working on and I can hit edit shape. And then what I like to do is just like highlight the line and then grab the dot and just pull it back to where I wanna be. And then I'll update that. And there we go. And then we'll do the same thing over here, just edit shape and just pull that back. Perfect. So you can see we can easily fix it. And another example, let's get rid of this molding. If I want to draw it manually, you can see I actually missed my point there by a bit. Okay, now just like the countertops, you see this little wall selector, this kind of somewhat faint dotted line? Make sure you are highlighted on the right wall. It impacts how the elevation shows, which elevation view that molding that you're about to draw will show on. So make sure that you're highlighted on the right one. And another note, let me go ahead and delete this one beside it. I would not draw this as all one piece. It's tempting to just come in here and say new molding and snap lines all the way around. I just missed that, but that's okay. That is easy to do in here, but now when I go to elevation view, it doesn't look too bad, but you can start seeing remnants of pieces left over. So a lot of times what I would do, so even though this example doesn't look too bad, in my opinion, it's good practice to just draw to the corner and stop, select the new wall, continue on from the corner. That way you have each of your pieces. It still looks nice visually, and then each wall knows exactly which molding is on there. Now, when I go back to the molding editor, what if I need to change the elevation or change the profile or make other adjustments to the crown? If I highlight it and right click and go to properties, here's where I can change the material, the profile. So I could randomly use a totally different profile here, and I can change the elevation. I could put it at 120. And so, like I said, in the room tab, what you want to do is, even if you have multiple crowns in this room, pick the one that is the majority, and then you can just manually change the ones that you need to. So hopefully that gives you a good starting point for molding. Start putting it on your jobs and start playing with it. And then in a future video, we'll go deeper into more of the SKU-based, material-based molding method. But I think for the majority of shops, simplicity is the very best thing that you can shoot for. So I prefer this method, but like I said, we'll compare those in a future video. In this video, we're going to talk about adding a new room. So before I go to add a room, notice mine just says room 1. Let's say I want to add a little vanity or a bathroom. First of all, I'm going to click into the room settings and give this a name. I'm going to call this kitchen. Now you see the drop down says kitchen. And then if I want to add a new room, I just hit the little notepad looking thing or piece of paper. And it says new room. And it pops up and says, what do you want to add? And I'm going to call this bathroom. And now we have 2 rooms that we can toggle between. So let's just quickly draw a wall and grab our little favorites down here and put 1 cabinet. Now, when I go into the room settings, these are totally different settings now. Like I could do face frame over here in the bathroom and the kitchen can still be frameless. So you have a totally independent settings for each room. And this can be frameless. So each room settings relates only to that room. And remember, you can get back into this at any time. Here's a tip that often gets missed. Let's say, for example, we have several wall ends, like I'll call them. Say this caps that off, and this caps that off, and maybe I had put more walls over here. Okay, so now when I go to elevation view, we're gonna see all these elevations. And you don't think about how much time you waste flipping through this and trying to find what you need. So quick little tip here that, like I said, often gets missed. If you highlight the wall and call this a wall end, I'll just do that to each of them that I don't want to see in my elevations. Now when I go to elevation view, it skips over my wall ends. So now only the walls I want to see. This is my island, so I still want to see this. That's why it just looks empty. Now, that really helps with just cleaning things out. And if you want to take it a step farther, technically you can click on the wall, go to properties, and give it a name. Say sink wall. Now when we go to elevations, so I would highly encourage you to use wall ends because it does save a lot of times in flipping through and trying to find the right elevation. Now the last thing I might add is I don't necessarily love that it shows in green. And the reason it's doing that right now is because it's a separate option in the layer schedule. We have walls, and then we have wall ends. So what I want to do is just make that the same color as my walls, whether it's black or blue, whatever it is, just make it match the walls. And then you won't really think about it being different. You still get all the benefits in the elevation view, but you don't have to deal with the different looking colors. In this video, I'm going to talk about shaping cabinets. Now this can become a very complex topic whenever you try to make them parametric. And what I mean by that is you can create a custom shape, but then when you resize it, it blows up or it stretches in the wrong way. To make it parametric to where it maintains its shape and stretches as you change the cabinet size is the tricky part. In this video, I'm going to focus on the easy part, just actually making the shape that we need. Where we get into constraints and the difficult part is when we want to save an object to reuse later. So let's get into it. I'm going to pull a base cabinet out, and there's two different places you can shape from. I can actually shape from the main room level stuff right here. I can just right click and edit the shape of the cabinet. So let's say, for example, I just put a corner clip. I'll get my little chamfer tool and put a 10-inch chamfer, and that literally changes the shape of the cabinet. Now it put the face over here, or maybe that's the face. Let's look at it. Yeah, it looks like it tried to use a finished in there, which is probably okay. Now, just like the countertops, we can edit shape and highlight a line, and we can tell it what to be. So if I wanted both of these to be faces, I would just change it, and then I could leave this on end, and back. Very similar to the countertop editor, but now I have a way that I can assign two different faces. So I could put a door here. Notice how I have to toggle between face 1 and face 2 in order for the section to highlight. What I mean by that is when I'm on face 2, nothing highlights over here in the other area. It only highlights the current face. So to work on face 1, I have to have that selected here, and then I can highlight it. Kind of like when you pick a panelized in or a applied door, you have to be highlighted on the end before it can be selected. Okay, so let's go through just a couple common shapes that you might want to make. First, let's make a 90 corner. Now, obviously, we already have a 90 corner here, but I'm just going to create it from a standard base just to help you see the shaping aspect of things. And personally, I would rather shape from inside of the cabinet rather than here because I just don't like seeing all these lines while I'm shaping. So I'm going to double click into my cabinet, go to the top view, and then hit edit shape. I just think it's a little more predictable interface when you're inside the cabinet than when you're trying to do it at the whole room level. Okay, so actually before I start editing, I'm going to make this 36 by 36. Okay, now I can edit shape. And what I want to do is I just want to use my offset tool, and I want to offset 24 inches and 24 inches. Notice how I click on the line, I drag in the direction I want to go, and then I just type in what I need. Now, the thing with shaping is you can never have what they call too many shapes. So if I hit check, it'll say too many shape, which means it needs to be one consistent outline. There can't be these intersecting lines. We can select and delete lines, but that would delete the entire line. That's not what I want to do because I want to keep parts of it. So this is where the trim delete tool comes into play. So with this, it will recognize a section that's intersecting and only delete what I click on. So for example, I know I want to trim this out. So I'll click right here and click over here. Now you see if I hit check, you can kind of see the outline. It got rid of those two lines. Now it's just these two inside lines that are the problem. So I go back to my trim delete tool, click here, and notice it only deleted where it met the other line. And then we'll do the same thing here. Now if I hit check, that worked. And we got a nice little shape. Now it's not recognizing my sides correctly. So let's go back into plan view, hit edit shape, and this is a face. This is a face. This needs to be end auto. This needs to be a back. And this needs to be a back. And so that quickly we can build a corner cabinet. And if you wanted to put a clip on it, let's go to plan view, edit shape, and use that chamfer tool again. And let's put a 10-inch clip back there. So I click the first line and click the second line, and that chamfers that. Now I'll grab my select tool, click on this line, and make it a clip back. Now we haven't talked about the construction of corner cabinets at all, so this is probably not going to look very good. but right now we're focused on shaping. So you see it's pretty easy to build what you need. Now, a diagonal cabinet would be done very similarly. I'm not even just going to show that in this example. And that cabinet would not be ready to save to the library and stretched. If I actually undo that delete, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. This guy is not necessarily ready, because what we would want to happen is if we made this cabinet 40 inches wide, we would want it to still be 24 over here on the ends. And without putting constraints and without going and locking certain points to not move or to move a certain distance, this thing is just going to kind of scale proportionally. There's still some work to do, but if you're just doing it at the job level, you just need this one cabinet for this one time. The shaping is pretty simple. Okay, so let's delete it and let's look at another way of shaping. So there's a lot of different shapes we could do from the top. You could clip a corner, you could do a 90 corner, you could do a diagonal. But in this example, I want to talk about another direction we can shape from. So we just did the top view. Now let's do the end view. Let's say we have a ADA cabinet. We can hit edit shape and maybe we want to offset 9 inches down, maybe 6 inches back, and maybe 6 inches, let's do 8 inches up. And then I'll grab my line, and I don't have snap to points turned on, which is annoying because that does not work. Turn off my grid and turn on snap to points. That just locks right in there. And then I get my trim delete tool out again and go to work. So I'll just clean this up, just get rid of any lines that is not part of the perimeter. Then I can hit check. And what I like to do is just save it, see how it does automatically, and then come back in and assign it, because sometimes it gets pretty close. I'm just gonna put none here, none here, bottom, we got the back, and we got the top. And so there we have just a very basic shape. Now, again, more than likely, while you're creating this, you'd want to save something like this to your library. And in one of the feature sections, which I can't wait to get to because that's really what I enjoy the most, is the object intelligence and UCS's part. But I'll give you an example of putting attributes on the sidebar to control the top height, the angle of the slant, and all that good stuff. And we don't necessarily have to have this little leg. This is just an example of shaping. But there is a tremendous amount of power with constraining shapes to a certain size and even controlling it off of the sidebar if you need to change the top height and all that stuff. So tremendous power. I can't wait to get you guys to that section and start working through some of the really, really fun stuff. But we got to work on the foundations. We got to get everybody up to speed, and we'll get there soon enough. In this video, we're going to talk about adding CAD to our drawing. This can happen on the elevation view or the plan view or even inside of a cabinet. So to illustrate what I'm talking about, I'm going to go to CAD from the elevation view, and I'm going to grab a text leader, one of my favorite CAD tools, and just I click right on the drawer front, and I click again, and then I right click whenever I'm ready to start writing. So I'll just say this is a sink. Very cool. Now maybe there's a silverware tray right here. So I'll click, and I'm just left clicking every time I want to leave a point. I'm just exaggerating how many points I need here. And then as soon as I'm done, I right click, and then I can type what I need. Okay, so text leaders are a really powerful way to make your drawings look like an architectural blueprint if you do a good job with your text leaders. The other types of CAD tools we can do are just the text by itself. So for example, if I didn't want to do the arrow, I could just write sync directly on here. That would do that. Easy enough. Text box really don't need a whole lot of explanation. If you're doing more of a paragraph style, like, you want to write a whole bunch of stuff and you need the extra spaces, the box will be better formatted for that. It doesn't have to have a frame. You can turn that off. And this is actually a good note. Remember when we was doing the walls section, I talked about saving defaults, how it's kind of quirky. You got to go back to the select tool. Let's look at that example with text box. I know that I don't want a outline every time I do a text box. So how do I save that as my default? If I click text box, turn off the frame, and go immediately back to the select tool before I actually place it on my drawing. Now every time I add a text box, there's no frame. Okay, so that's a very important thing that you need with CAD tools, is remembering how to save those defaults. Because if you saw on my text leader, my arrow is white. Well, what happens if I don't want a white arrow? I don't want to have to click on this every time I have to add it and add a black arrow. So I would click on text leader. I would go to closed, go right back to select. So now, when I go into this, I got a nice arrow. And there we go. Or, what if I want this to be red every time I do it? Again, same thing, go text leader, choose a red color, and go right back to the select tool. Now every time it's going to be red. And there we go. Now, another really important thing that you will need in the CAD tools is the dimensions. So we'll talk about dimensions, the actual auto dimensions, whenever we get to the customer drawing section. But for now, just those are automatically happening based on where the cabinets are placed. But sometimes you'll need to add custom dimensions. So you can do that from within the CAD tools. You can go to dimensions. And the dimension style here is important because you'll find the simple dimension very frustrating. Like if I wanted to put a dimension in this window, I don't like when it's lined. It's hard to see and you can't move it out of the way. So what I like is called aligned. So what this means is I can click 2 points and then drag in the direction I want to go. Makes it super easy to place things. So let's save that as our default. Click on dimensions, make it aligned, and go back to select. And you can play with the other dimension styles there. You can measure angles and do different things with dimension styles. Obviously we have some shape, some lines, which is all pretty familiar CAD tools, so I'm not even going to cover that in much detail. Get familiar with putting an object out on the elevation. Look at what options you have to customize it, and then if you want to save your defaults, make sure you do that to save time for next time.